This lecture has been made available to you courtesy of the American Numismatic Society.
It is 1 o'clock. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for long table number 278. It's my pleasure to introduce today's guest, Dr. Fae Amiro. Fae has served as a postdoctoral research associate at Western University and an assistant professor at Mount Allison University, where her research focused on the portraits of Roman imperial women. In addition to being an Eric P. Newman Summer Seminar student in 2017, Fae has also received the ANS's Chairman's Fellowship in Numismatic Research in 2025 for her project at the Vindolanda Archaeological Coins Project, which she'll be discussing more today. So thank you for being here, Fae. With that, I turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. Just want to check that my slides are showing up okay. Perfect. All right, thank you so much for having me today. So today I'm going to be talking about my preliminary work at Vindolanda. So Vindolanda is a Roman fort located 1 mile south of Hadrian's Wall and is among the most famous Roman frontier sites in Britain. While not as well known as some of the other facts from the site's approximately 4,700 coins provide us with a fascinating look into the economic and social history of the site's approximately 300 years of Roman occupation. I was very fortunate 2 years ago to be brought on to work as the numismatist for the site as part of a postdoctoral fellowship I conducted at the University of Western Ontario. And since then, I've been working with the site staff and volunteers on this project that I'll be introducing you to today, which mainly involves the databasing and rehousing of all of these 4,700 coins from the past 100 years of excavation, along with then identifying and cataloging and databasing all of the new coins from each year's subsequent excavations. So today's talk will provide a introduction to the site as a whole. Then I'll go into the status of the project, and finally, I will give you an overview of the assemblage to give you a sense of what we're dealing with in this collection. And before I continue, I do want to once again thank the ANS for their support with this project, or in the form of this Chairman's Fellowship, which has been a great help with many aspects of this project. So, Vindolanda is a Roman auxiliary fort located just south of Hadrian's Wall. Around 40 years after the founding of the province of Britain in 43, the general Agricola during the Flavian dynasty extended Roman rule and established what we call the Stane Gate. This word is Northumbrian for stone road. And this is a Roman road with forts distributed at one day's march or 21 kilometers from each other approximately, at which the soldiers were stationed. Vindolanda is one of these forts you can see on the plan there and was established around 85. With the loss of the Scottish territory to the north a few years later, the Stane Gate becomes the frontier of the Roman Empire in Britain. And additional forts are built in that period to fortify the defenses along the frontier. In 122, Hadrian's Wall is built approximately 1 mile north of the Stane Gate with, of course, its own forts. In the early period of construction, Vindolanda is likely involved in helping with the construction efforts. But even after the completion of the wall forts, Vindolanda does continue to house soldiers until the end of Roman presence at the frontier in the 4th century. And we have then afterwards a much reduced post-Roman occupation lasting for probably several centuries thereafter. So the site itself is a series of what's believed to be probably about 9 forts built on top of each other on the site on various plans. The first group are built of timber and date from around 85 to around the 160s. Because they're built of timber and, it's a very damp conditions, of course, in the north of England. These had to be rebuilt or at least refurbished every 12 years due to the degradation of the wood. Additionally, the fort was rebuilt every time there was a group of soldiers stationed at the site. And so we have these subsequent group of around 5 or so timber forts. Um, the earliest timber fort is located about 5 meters below the modern ground level. Around the 160s, we have the construction of the earliest stone fort, followed by several subsequent additions and refurbishments throughout the next several centuries. Um, Again, it's abandoned after the Roman withdrawal from Britain at the start of the 5th century, but there is evidence of post-Roman occupation at the site afterwards. The site is not exclusively the fort, as you can see on the plan. You can see the walls of the fort lining it, but also adjacent to it, we have the civilian settlement, which exists in some form throughout most of the periods. In the later periods, we get, at least in the 3rd century, we get this larger settlement that actually rises to the status of what we would call a vicus, which would mean that it has its own semi-autonomous government to adjacent to the fort. But we have some evidence of at least some amount of civilian settlement in other periods as well adjacent. But for anyone who knows the site, for by far the most well-known feature of the site is something that the Romans did not in any way intend, but is a complete accident of the conservation of the materials because of the nature of the ground and the materials they were using at the time. And the fact that the Romans had this practice whenever they built a new fort, they would demolish the old fort and lay down a clean layer of cover on top of it. What they did was accidentally create this anaerobic environment whereby the lower layers in a damp condition are then sealed off from oxygen from the upper layers. And so this results in excellent preservation of many organic artifacts that, of course, anywhere else in any wet conditions are going to not withstand the tests of time. And so this means that Vindolanda is really special for its the preservation of large amounts of organic materials, including large amounts of wooden and leather goods. Some of the more standout objects from the assemblage, while there truly are so many, a couple of uh, of the more fun ones are these 2 boxing gloves, which were not actually probably a pair originally, but we have these 2 boxing gloves you can see that are made of leather. We also have this horse chamfron. You can see the actual each one in the front, and then the reconstruction on the horse. Um, but most numerously among the leather finds, we have around 5,000 shoes, which are primarily found in disposal contexts. This means that they often have significant amounts of wear. They often are in need of repair in some way or very damaged. And we rarely actually find pairs. There's actually very few pairs of shoes surviving from the site. But of course, footwear, while it's very useful and interesting for studying, fashion and the practicalities of footwear in the Roman army, it is also very revealing about demographics because the sizes and styles of shoes can reveal the wearers. And so the shoes have been a big part in helping establish the presence of women and children at the fort in numbers that were previously not appreciated. The most significant finds from historical perspective from the site are the writing tablets. These were written on wafer-thin paper with carbon ink, and they record communications largely between the soldiers on the frontiers and correspondence elsewhere in the empire, as well as the archive and sort of record keeping of the fort's prefect. Um, these have been found again in the earlier phases of the fort with the anaerobic context. The largest assemblage of them comes from between 100 and 120. The first were discovered in the 1970s, and the most recent ones were found in 2017. To date, over 1,700 have been found, with an addition of 340 stylus tablets. So these are tablets that would have originally been covered with wax, and then the user would have inscribed things in wax on them. So we have those as well, which are unfortunately to date not legible, but there is work being done on trying to read the remains of the scratchings in those. Now, these letters, of course, can provide us with a huge amount of interesting insights into individuals at the site. But this is, I think, a lot of people's favorite. This is the famous birthday party invitation, which you can see on the slide, which shows a woman inviting her sister to join her for her birthday party. So, one of these very rare glimpses into personal lives and these kinds of more everyday moments in the Roman Empire that so rarely are preserved because we have so little of this kind of material from elsewhere. And so it is among all of these other fantastic artifacts that we have our coin assemblage. Um, these, of course, create just as large of a corpus as some of the other artifacts. There's approximately 4,700 of them, but they have not received the same attention, of course, as some of these other more one-off unique artifacts. Um, the coins are obviously, however, crucial for dating areas of the site. And overall, the coin quantities can give evidence of things like settlement patterns and economic activities. Um, so, what I'm going to do now is just give you an introduction to the history of the coins from the site, which will also give you a little bit of a history of the excavation of the site in general before we get into the current project. So the earliest history of the coins, as you probably could guess from the date, unfortunately, are not well recorded, right? That is par for the course for anything that has been known for so long. Unfortunately, for the preservation of these things, the site was well known for a long time before the start of proper excavation. And certainly, even before Headley, there must have been coins found on the site that were never recorded and have now been lost to us. There were very brief 18th century excavations by John Warburton, which specifically he was seeking objects to sell, and presumably coins would have been among these objects, but they've not been explicitly recorded. We have very frustratingly an account of a visit to the site a decade later in 1725, at which point the person living on the site reported that he had found many coins, but his children threw them away. And so we have that very unfortunate anecdote as well, reminding us of how different of a time it was, of course, but also just the realities of working with a site with this kind of history. The earliest proper excavations from Vindolanda were those from by Anthony Headley in the 1830s following his acquisition of the land. We have reports of upwards of 300 coins being found by him between 1830 and 1834. Unfortunately, they were not individually recorded, or at least we don't have a record of them being individually recorded, and they were dispersed shortly after his death. But we do have record of his correspondence that tells us that these were mostly early 4th century coins that came from the fort, and he specifically mentions a couple of emperors depicted on them. So based on this description, it's been theorized this is a dispersed Constantinian dynasty hoard associated with the 4th century markets, and we'll talk a bit about the 4th century markets later. But the fact that any identifiable information is preserved for these is really quite fortunate for us. The land then remained in the possession of the Headley family until its acquisition by the lawyer John Clayton in 1863, who purchased huge amounts of land along the wall in order to save it from what was happening at the time, which was a lot of quarrying and other disruptive practices, reusing the stone for other things. He did a great service in preserving the land as well as artifacts, but there wasn't like a big, excavation project happening, and we don't have any record of any specific coins from this period. Eventually, the land was acquired by Eric Burley in 1929, and we're very fortunate that the vast majority of the coins found from the site starting in this period are still preserved, and not only preserved, but remarkably also recorded with their original find spots and other identifying information. Now, unfortunately, some of this is not totally decipherable find spot information, but we have much more than we might expect from this period. And from this time on, we also are fortunate that professional numismatists have always been working with the coins. And so the coins have been receiving proper professional identifications, starting with the work by W. Percy Headley during the Burley excavations. The estate was sold in 1950 to a local farmer, but excavations continued in the Burley family, with his son Robin taking over as head of excavation and his wife, Robin's wife, that is Patricia, serving as chief curator following Eric's retirement. In 1970, the land was repurchased by Daphne Archibald, who transferred it to a charitable trust, initially founded by the Burleys and the Archibalds. This began with very humble beginnings with no, real visitor infrastructure. But this has now been built up, of course, into a very professional organization with a on-site museum and major facilities to help the over 100,000 visitors that come to the site every single year. Excavations continue into the present, currently being led by Robin's grandson, Andrew, as well as his wife, Barbara, serving as the museum's chief curator and conservator. Excavations continue on the site through a volunteer lottery, which is a very special part of the way the site works and has created this wonderful culture of including not only the local community in these annual excavations, but also people from all over the world getting to come and enjoy the site in that very hands-on, direct way. The modern excavations have continued to be, the coins from these have continued to be identified by professional numismatists, most prominently starting with John Casey, and then he was succeeded by Richard Brickstock. Both of these men really created the foundation for our knowledge of the site's coinage as well as the documentation system, which originally, of course, before computer entries were more common, was in a card catalog format, but had then been converted into Excel spreadsheets. And I owe a particularly great debt to Richard Brickstock, who is the one who took the time to go back through all the previously excavated coins, create an updated card catalog, as well as Excel spreadsheet with information on all of the coins, initially up to 1999, and then continue to update each year up through 2022. So on the slide, you can see two of the card examples from the Brickstock archive, and you can see the detailed information that we get, which, for someone working with legacy data, we really get such great data on these, as well as from these, something that is lost in the Excel sheets is the tracing of the coins, which, of course, in most cases is not necessary because the coins are well recorded. But in times when they have been removed from their inventory numbers, these tracings have been essential for really double, triple checking that we have the right coin matched with the right entry. We also have this wonderful problem archive, which is the bottom group of coins, which are the coins that Brickstock was not able to associate with a proper entry in the collection at the time that he did his search, which has, again, because of all this information and particularly the coin tracings, has been crucial for me to be able to solve a few of these problems, but also at times just give me a little peace of mind when I too am puzzled by a coin that I can't figure out where it came from. That there are a couple of these lingering mysteries that are, primarily these very early coins that perhaps will not find their original context, unfortunately. But this is an incredibly low number for such an extensive assemblage that has existed for such a long time. It's quite impressive how few mysteries we've encountered, which I feel very grateful for. So the current project was started in 2024 with discussions and in collaboration with Barbara Burley, who is the museum's curator. And we had a few initial goals in this project. One is to actually migrate all the numismatic material into the museum's collection database. This was the last of the major museum sections that had not been entered into the database yet. And the second one is to find a permanent storage solution for the coins, which were not properly stored in a way that made it easy to find individual coins when you wanted to find them. So the museum had begun using the software collections index plus several years earlier. And so the goal that summer, the summer of 2024, I took all the data from the coins and converted them into a way that was able to be migrated into the spreadsheets, or from the spreadsheet, sorry, into the database. And once the initial migration was completed, we were then able to move on to phase two, which was actually physically rehousing and therefore auditing at the same time all of the coins to make sure that we actually have all of them, and that they all have a home and they're all organized so people can easily find the coins and use them. And this phase is now, I'm happy to say, nearing completion, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. Once this is done, we will then enter the final, but as you can probably guess, much by far longest phase, which is going to be individually going through each coin, making sure that all the information is there in the database, reassessing it, filling in any missing data or errors, as well as taking a reference photo for each coin, so that each coin is recorded fully in detail in the database. So when I started working on the assemblage, I received this file, which this is just obviously a snapshot from it, which is the Brickstock spreadsheets. These were in absolutely fantastic shape. I've talked to a lot of people who work for legacy data, and I feel so grateful that I inherited such a well-organized assemblage. But the main challenge here, of course, is that the database that I'm migrating them to does not work in the same way as an Excel spreadsheet. So it's about finding ways to turn this information into a standardized form that can be converted into like drop down menus and things like that that work well with a proper database. So that was really the challenge working with this, as well as the fact that we're not just working with a numismatic database on its own, but it's a database for all the other material as well. So it's not just about making fields that make sense for the coins, but also making sure that we're using the fields in the database in the same way that all the other material is, so that there's no confusion between different artifacts in the way the database is being used. We're also trying to convert as much as possible into drop-down menus. So basically just make it as searchable, as narrowly searchable as possible, get rid of all the free text as much as possible. One story to try to illustrate some of the challenges that we faced with these legacy data is the standardization of the actual inventory numbers of the coins. So the coins are all recorded. You can see the SF number. These are actually the inventory numbers column. These were recorded up to the 1970s in one series written with a lowercase c, which went up to about the number 900. Then in 1980, there was a single year where they were numbered just for that year. And then we restarted counting from one the subsequent year of excavation. So we basically have two series of overlapping numbers for about 1,000 doubled up numbers, as well as numbers 1 to 10. The years in the 30s, they were renumbering every single year. So we had all of these coins that have the exact same inventory number, with only the case of the C, which, C is not a very good letter for this, regardless of being the differentiator. And so we came up with a solution for this, which is to add in the year of excavation to the number, which brings it in line with other artifacts in the collection, but also eliminates this confusion. But that's just one of the things, dealing with these kinds of data that we have to sort through. And so here is a look at what the database looks like now that the coins have all been migrated. This is just the search view. So when you search for an object, this is the simple view that you see. These are the 2025 coins because we don't have photographs. We haven't started photography for earlier years yet. So this gives you a sense of the state of the database. But we have an image. I've set it so the obverse should always be the image that we're looking at. And then we have the name. This was a bit of a challenge to decide if we're going to do the name as the denomination or is the name going to be like coin. But ultimately, it made the most sense based on the other fields available to have the denomination as the name. Then production dates, date of excavation, and then brief description, which are all standardized descriptive forms. And so this is just the search view, and you can see what we see when we search. I have cropped out, there is additional information on location and things like that, which we're not sharing for security reasons, obviously. This is what an individual coin looks like at this point. Again, some sensitive information has been edited out, but this is most of what you see. And we have some interesting things that we had to work through when creating this database. In particular, in order to be able to identify people in this database, you do have to actually make them a person in the database, which otherwise, because coins are the only objects from the site that actually have like a real, a person associated with the tablets are recorded elsewhere. We had to add all the Roman emperors in as people next to like the excavators and historians and modern people. And so we had to match modern archival standards for naming. And so we had to give them all a job. So Constantine's job is Roman Emperor and Divus, for example. So an interesting project of trying to go through how their names are going to work and that kind of thing. But all of these, then all the blue fields are clickable. So these are all fields that you can click on, and you can see all the other objects of the same that match in the same way. So very useful searchable feature. And so the other major phase that we've engaged with is the rehousing project. So when I arrived, the coins were stored primarily in separate coin boxes or coin binders, and these were then sorted variously. Some were by production year, some were by excavation year, some are by emperor. And so I owe a great debt to one of our wonderful Vindolanda volunteers, Liz, who took a bunch of time before I arrived to actually physically sort all of the coins just by number, which saved just enormous amounts of time. Of course, one unfortunate problem with sorting by number is, of course, the big C, little c problem that I mentioned. So we actually had doubles, if not triples or quadruples, of many of the numbers. So then I did what you can see here, which is stacking them by number, comparing them. Luckily, again, Brickstock's cataloging was so thorough that in most cases it's very easy to see which one's which of two coins of the same number from the two series. But this is the state that I met them in. We also have some fun because they're archaeological coins. Sometimes they are permanently stuck to rocks and can't be removed from them. So we do have some fun rocks like 407 in that image, which have their own place because they don't fit in the cabinet properly. But these then have been put in their individual boxes, which this was, of course, a big discussion of when you're establishing a new organization system, what are you going to do? And I quickly discovered that, my ANS training was very much in favor of the coin box, as that was what I was familiar with. Apparently, this is not common in the UK, and so we did have to seek out a company that was willing to make us boxes small enough for this purpose. But we're very lucky. We made it work, and we have these individual cardstock boxes that we write the information on. We write their coin number, the emperor if it's known, if not the denomination, and if not just illegible, which of course with archaeological coins does sometimes happen. And then on the bottom of the box, they also have their number written on them. And so each one is in their individual box, and they are organized by excavation year because that's the most sensible organization for the reasons why we use the collection to understand the excavation and archaeology of the site. It makes the most sense to store them that way. And so this is ultimately what a completed tray looks like at this stage. So I have put in what I believe are going to be my messy handwriting temporary little flags for each year that I have the vision that someday I will make look nicer, but shows you what year each one is. And then any coin on display, like the two, you can see these two little white cards in one that tells you where the coin that's not currently in its box is at present, and then it will be able to be returned to its box when it comes back. And so in line with this, we've also been conducting an audit of the coins as we go. So recording each coin that we have. And I'm very pleased to say that we, outside of, again, the coins that were recorded as being lost since the 1930s, we are not running into any issues with, not being able to find coins that we're supposed to have. but auditing as we go to make sure that each coin is accounted for and know exactly how many coins that we have. So by the end of the summer, this audit will be complete. I'm very grateful to my wonderful volunteer, Peter, who has been in my absence, continuing to make all of these boxes by, write on these boxes, fold all these boxes, and put coins in them very diligently throughout the year. And he's made great progress. And so we're very close to actually being done this stage of the project, at which point we will be able to move on to the next phase. So as you can see, at this point, most of the project has really been dedicated to the practicalities of managing the collection, the databasing and rehousing. But we are at a stage now where we can start to look at the database and actually use it to create some preliminary ideas about the assemblage. So what I present here is an overview of the coin finds of the site, which in the coming years will be able to result in a proper research program on individual aspects of the coinage. There's some caution that we haven't started the phase 3 yet of actually examining the individual coins, which will, of course, result in some changes to the data. However, from the rehousing and the audit, I've not found any coins that don't match their database entry in any meaningful way. So it is more the case that the issue is that some of the early coins just don't have all the information recorded as opposed to any major corrections. So we can assume that when we're looking on a large scale, we have a pretty good approximation of the realities of the collection. And so graphed here is a survey of the coins found at the site over the past 100 years. These are recorded as coins per mil, which is a standard way of recording the coins, in a quantitative fashion. And you can compare these. So this white histogram, you compare this to the Vindolanda 1930 to 2006 data, which, as you can see, has a little under half as many coins as the current table does today. So we're able to say a bit more about them because of the extra information we have. We have more data. So looking at the histogram, there's some fairly intuitive aspects and others that may be surprising for those of you who are not used to working in Rome and Britain. I will say that one change that is going to be made in the database that hasn't yet is that traditionally at Vindolanda, we've been recording the radiate copies as our Reese period 13, 260 to 275, which is the period of the Gallic Empire. So it's the period when the original coins were actually made, but the standard in the reporting guidelines for British numismatics wants us to put them in period 14 because most of them are produced at somewhat of a delay. So that's why there's a bit of a bump in the 275 to 96 catalog for my data compared to the earlier Brickstack data. But also this will be even more skewed because all of those copies are eventually going to into 14 to go in line with the current reporting standards. But either way, you can see there's a huge amount of these late third century coins, and we'll get into that as we go. But what I'm going to do right now is just give you a chronological history of the coins going period by period to show you a little bit of the history of the money from the site. And so starting with the Republican coins, despite the fact that, of course, our site is not actually built until 85 CE, we do actually have 60 denarii from the Republic. Of course, these coins came to site much later than their original production. And therefore, these are coins that continue in circulation for a long time. So you might notice I don't actually have any pictures of coins from the site on this slide. That's because all of our Republican coins at the site are completely worn to the point that an image of it really is not very identifiable. There's not much to identify them as a Republican coin without investigating it yourself because they're so worn. So our earliest coins from the Republic, we have 60 of them. They're all denarii, and the earliest one dates back to 150 BCE, which is over 200 years, of course, before the start of the fort. There's other individual finds from the intervening decades, but by far our largest group of Republican coins are the so-called legionary coins of Mark Antony, which date to 31 to 32 BCE and make up over half of the Republican denarii in the assemblage. These coins were made to fund the Civil War with Octavian, and they all display a galley on one on the obverse and and legionary standards on the reverse. This prominence is very much not unique to Vindolanda. It's a trend we see elsewhere, not only in Britain, but also throughout the empire. Their long circulation is attributable to two things. One is that they were produced in very large numbers, so there's just a lot of them. And two, they were debased in comparison with what else was circulating at the time. And so the Antony denarii are about 92% fine, while their contemporaries are around 97% fine. And this brings us to Gresham's law, with bad coinage driving out good coinage, because people are more inclined to keep coins that have a higher intrinsic value and spend coins that have a lower intrinsic value. And therefore, these coins continued to be circulated throughout the centuries. This debasement also probably resulted in them not being recalled or restruck at any point, because it would have produced fewer coins and therefore it was not like financially worthwhile to do so. And so as a result, we have hundreds of years of circulation of these coins, and they make it all the way to our furthest frontier, Vindolanda, at the edge of the empire. Due to the churn, as Brickstock called it, of the site, meaning that because of plowing and construction, there are times when material was kicked between layers. And so we can't always, depending on the archaeological context, say for certain whether a coin was still in circulation, a coin found in a layer was still in circulation at the time of that layer's use. And this is where coin hoards become an invaluable resource, since a hoard, of course, should have been active until the date of at least until the date of the last production date on a coin in that hoard. And so we actually do have at Vindolanda 2 Antony coins found in a purse hoard in 1999. And this hoard also contains 2 Severan coins, the last of which was produced in 222, meaning that the 2 Antony coins left circulation for the last time at a minimum 250 years after their original production. Moving on to the Julio-Claudian, the Flavian period, we see very few, as you see, very few Julio-Claudian coins. We have the same reason for this as the reason for the earlier Republican coins, right? The fort is not built yet, so they're not coming in as contemporary coins with the construction. And the debasement probably resulted in the debasement of the Antony coins probably resulted in these not having as much circulation, because they're finer than the Antony coins. We do get some bronzes, but not a lot either, as you can see. We do get generally a lot of denarii at the site, which does match probably the fact that it is a military context. We also get in the Vindolanda tablets, the unit of account is usually given as the denarius in a time when the sestertius was the norm as the unit of account. So the site is actually founded around 85. 4 years into Domitian's reign, so the final Flavian emperor, and this results in the construction of the first timber fort. And so we do see, as you can see, a big uptick in the Flavian period of the presence of coins. Of course, coin losses do not just indicate are not just contemporary with the exact date of production, but there's continued circulation of older coins always within the system. New coins should even be put in quotes here, because our evidence from the site, if we compare the period of the latest coin in an area of a site with the datable evidence from the Vindolanda tablets, that usually give us quite clear evidence of exactly when the area of the site was in use, we seem to have a lag of about 7 to 8 years for coins making it up to the site after being struck. One very special coin was produced in this period from the site, which is the site's only aureus. This is, as you can maybe see on the slide, a Neronian coin that was found in the excavations Interestingly, it was found in a 4th century context. Of course, this context alone doesn't necessarily mean that it was actively circulating all the way to the 4th century. However, it is quite worn, so an extensive, long circulation does seem to be the case for this coin. The next dynasty, we see major developments of the frontier. Of course, we have the construction of Hadrian's Wall in 122, and Vindolanda seemingly serving as an administrative hub and being continually occupied after the completion of the construction. The Antonine Wall was constructed in 142 and moved the border north for about 20 years before the border was then moved back to Hadrian's Wall in 162. The reign of Commodus also saw significant unrest at the border, with multiple generals said to solve several revolts spilling across. So we have, as you can see, a significant amount of coins from Trajan to Antoninus in comparison with what came before and immediately after. This is the period of the construction of the wall, as well as an expansion and elaborate refurbishment of the fort. We also see a decline in the time of Commodus, even in the per year calculation. This could be linked with this seeming, there's some unrest at the border at the time. There's also some strange activity at the fort, especially in the early Severan period, which again, if we're thinking about a 7-year lag in the coins, which would correspond. However, the most exciting thing about the coins from this period are the fact that they come from the anaerobic contexts. Most ancient copper and copper alloy coins look either green or brown, or some even a dark, almost black today, due to the patination and corrosion of the copper from, of course, 2,000 years of exposure to the elements. This is such the case that even replica coins, which is the case for the first coin on the slide, usually have the appearance of a somewhat weathered coin as opposed to a fresh-looking coin. However, in antiquity, these coins would have, of course, not been this color, and in fact would have been 2 different colors: red for the copper ases and gold and brass for the orichalcum and Dupontii. The orichalcum, Dupontii, and Sesterdii. And so the anaerobic coins from Vindolanda do actually preserve their original appearance in many cases. For my very cursory account, as I've been doing the audit, there's approximately about 100 of these coins at the site that maintain this original surface appearance. These coins range in date from production date from Nero to Antoninus Pius, with by far our largest concentration being from the reign of Trajan. And these are, of course, noteworthy as one of our few groups of coins with a proper archaeological context that have this kind of rare appearance. So the following year, following a year of civil war, Septimius Severus was victorious and began the Severan dynasty. During his reign, he spent considerable time in Britain putting down revolts that had continued from the reign of Commodus, and he ultimately died in York, in England, in 211. The Severan period is the first period in which inflation becomes a problem for the empire as well. And we also see the significant debasement of the denarius in this period. We also have as well the introduction of the radiate as a major reform to the coinage. This is introduced as just part of the broader system, but as time goes on, it becomes progressively debased, and it eventually becomes basically the only coin circulating and being produced regularly in the system. At Vindolanda, this is a period of the construction of a new stone fort, which largely the remains of which are what you see today on the site. Following the end of the Severan dynasty, we have a period of political unrest in the empire, and most significantly for us, we have the rise of a breakaway empire, which we usually call the Gallic Empire, which does include Britain. We therefore see 2 groups of coins appearing at the site: the ones produced at Rome and the ones produced by this breakaway empire. So I've highlighted in yellow the Gallic emperors in the table, so you can see who's who. By 260, we are in a situation where almost everything almost all the coins are radiates, and the debasement of the radiate has also increased. Once again, we see Gresham's law come into effect, where we see the posthumous coins, which are a much higher silver content than the other circulating coins, circulating much less than our later Gallic Empire emperors, and particularly Victorinus and Tetricus, which have much less. There's also, we do see a few hoards at the site, which also relate to this. In particular, in 2024, there was a hoard found of 9 not very worn Gallic Empire coins, which are all posthumous coins, because, of course, they are the more valuable ones. And so this is probably a savings hoard. One of the most fun things about the coins of the British frontier, of course, is that they did not just continue to use the coins from Rome. They also started making their own coins locally, which we refer to usually as radiate copies. Why they were making their own coins at this time is not entirely, of course, solved, but there seems that they did feel the need for more money, and perhaps particularly smaller denominations of money than they were supplied with. These are incredibly common, to the point where it doesn't seem that there is much of an effort to stop their production by the government, whether they just didn't mind or they weren't equipped to prevent this kind of activity. These vary significantly in how much they approximate the appearance of the real contemporary coins, both in their sizes and weights. And you can see this table of the dimensions of the radiates from 1 year of the excavations. Which this is a table made by Brickstock, where you can see the copies are in orange and the authentic coins are in blue. So the images on the slide are 2 of my favorite recent examples of the radiate copies. One is actually from Magna, which is the other site that is owned and operated by the Vindolanda Trust, which has what I think is my best guess is trying to approximate Sol on the reverse of this coin, but obviously there is sort of a very schematic rendering of it. But perhaps my favorite for recent years was one found in 2024 at Vindolanda, which you can see on the other side of the slide, which has a wonderful legend, which I don't know if anyone can read Latin here, but it says something along the lines of VVVVV or UUU, or perhaps 555 if you think these are numerals. But clearly, right, this is not a comprehensible inscription. This is somebody who was making the coins without considering the actual language of what was written on them, but rather mimicking their appearances. You can also see that the diaxis on that coin is also not at all regular based on the orientation of the 2 sides. So in 284, we have a political crisis that brought an at least temporary close to, the political crisis is brought to a close by the rise of Diocletian and his eventual establishment of the Tetrarchy, dividing the empire into 4 quadrants. And a decade later, we see the previous coin system be retired and replaced with a new system made up of 4 denominations of coins with a very small amount of silver, which we don't know their names of, so we usually just refer to them by their diameters. There's an apparent break in the settlement at the fort at this time, sometime following the end of the Gallic Empire, which is traced by the fact that we don't have very many coins from the next period, in particular the breakaway British Empire, which lasted from 286 to 296. We don't have many coins at all from that period in comparison with other areas in Britain where there are significant amounts of those coins found. The fort seems to be re-inhabited sometime during the reign of Diocletian, maybe as a result of his border reforms. And the size of the garrison in this period, however, does also decrease, and the neighboring civilian settlement is abandoned. After this, there are a large number of coins of Constantine and his son being produced, which also include a significant amount of local copies following the tradition of the coins we saw in the previous period. The most significant site for coin finds within Vindolanda by far is the granary. This work was all conducted by Richard Brickstock, based on the 2008 excavations. In an average year, we're finding about 100 to 150 coins on the site. Of course, this varies, but that's roughly an average. But within the area of the granary, there are nearly 500 coins that were found in that single year. These are primarily small change, and there's also a preponderance of copies, even more so than elsewhere in the site. Associated with this assemblage is also probably those 300 coins I mentioned a while back about from those 1930 Headley excavations. The coin evidence led Brickstock and excavators to conclude that the granary had seemingly been converted into a market during the 4th century. And it's probably in correlation with the reduction in the size of the extramural settlement, where in earlier periods, that's probably more where this kind of activity would have happened. But moving into the fort as things are shrinking in this period. There's a decreasing number of coins found during the reign of Valentinian and Valens, and a complete drop-off following the reign of Gratian, with the exception of 2 Arcadius coins, which were produced at the latest in 395. Remembering that we have, at least a couple years of delay from when coins usually would actually make it all the way to Britain, we are probably looking at a situation where the last Roman coins are making it around 400, which does match well with the history of the area. Britain is officially abandoned by the Romans in 407. This, of course, does not, however, mean that there are not people at the site just because the official Roman occupation has come to an end. There's plentiful evidence for at least 200 years of post-Roman occupation. And we do find some coins in the post-Roman levels, which could suggest some current continued use by the locals, of course, but this is all very preliminary, and it's more likely that most of this is just a result of things being not entirely sealed between the different contexts. At the very least, it doesn't seem, of course, that there are any new Roman coins or any major amount of monetization happening at the site following the site's abandonment. And so the current excavations are underway. I'll be returning in July to work on the coins that have been found in this year's excavations. And the current project is a 5-year project called the Castrum Project, which is looking to complete the final quadrant of excavating in the 4th century fort. Sadly, another reality of the site that is being worked on is that climate change is impacting the site in major ways. The anaerobic layers rely on the perpetual wet or damp conditions under the ground that have been very consistent in Vindolanda for many generations, but are changing with the change in the climate. And so Vindolanda is actually teaming up with what's called the Cassandra Project to actually try to monitor and identify the most at-risk areas of the site to try to excavate and preserve as much as possible of the remaining anaerobic contexts. So hopefully this introduction to the assemblage has demonstrated a little bit of some of the possibilities for future areas for the research with the project. So with the completion of the rehousing and auditing that will be done in the next couple of months, the real sort of research project will get underway, beginning with I have an undergraduate student coming with me to start analyzing particularly the Gallic Empire radiates for a couple of weeks in July. So that will be our first. Hopefully, we'll have some interesting results for you after that. So within this well-documented context, we're so lucky to have so many well-recorded coin finds and almost endless possibilities for where they go next. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Faye. That was really great, interesting presentation. I really love the radiate copies too, just from my own personal Celtic background. Like, really fascinating to see kind of continuations there. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself. Pop them in the chat. Warren was asking if you could show any images of any coins you consider particularly interesting.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we're at a stage where we have not photographed many of the coins yet. But I did include those two those two particularly far from accurate radiate copies, which I think are particularly interesting. I think within the site, what people talk about the most is the one gold coin, because it is that one off that nobody else has seen otherwise. And then of course, I think I haven't quite come up with sort of a proper research question with the anaerobic coins, but there's some really interesting like anaerobic discoloration to them, where some of them have almost a copper look, but then there's that there's different ways in which they have different colors in them, which I think there might be something really interesting there to work with them.
Yeah, Lyndall was saying it's really neat to see the natural appearance of the Trajan coins.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, those Trajan coins are already so spectacular, and especially to have something like Sister-D, yeah, it's a really, it's a really remarkable group of coins for sure. So many of this beautiful big Trajan Sister-D.
Mm. Mike is asking, some of the copper alloy coins illustrated seem to have powdery pale green corrosion. Is bronze disease a problem and is there an effort to treat it?
Yes, absolutely. So one part of the rehousing project is one to actually be able to monitor this kind of thing, and to then be able to like have a proper reporting and treatment program with them. Uh, so yes, I'm not the conservator, so that is not my area. But yes, absolutely, a big part of the motivation for having a proper place to store them is to, first of all, have a cabinet that meets modern archival standards, so that this is not going to be a problem in the future, and also to be able to address any problems that have already arisen. But there is an on-site, all the conservation is done on-site, so it's very much an in-house operation. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions?
And I should also do my thank you slide. I forgot to show that, just for all the acknowledgements. Of course, anything like this, there's so many people who must be thanked. So,
Oh, yeah. And I see Rick and Ben are here with us.
oh yes, absolutely, very very crucial parts of the project. Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Faye. Really appreciate you pulling this all together and sharing it all with us. Like I said, it's just really great. Really enjoyed your talk. Um, Next week, join us, or actually, sorry, not next week because we will be closed for Juneteenth. So we won't be having a long table again until June 26th. And that will be Jesse Kraft discussing Comitia Americana medals, minting victory while in the midst of war. And thank you again, Faye. Really wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye, all. Have a great weekend.